Hey everyone, welcome back. In the previous episode, we connected our identity server to a SQL database using Entity Framework, and we created our configurational store and operational stores to store our configuration and runtime data. In this episode, we're going to take a look at implementing the sign out functionality and taking a look at certificates and how to use them. This will be the last episode. I will make more videos if people are still confused about certain concepts and would like further explanations if it actually requires a video and can't be answered in a question. But nevertheless, let's get started. So the first thing that I want to do in the startup of my identity server here, let's go ahead into the application cookie and copy this login path. And what I want to do first is I just want to explicitly set my logout path, right? So the process is we're going to be on a client and we want to log out. So we will have to log out on the client and we will have to log out on the identity server, right? So we're logging out in two places. So let's go ahead, set the logout path, and let's set it to something like logout, right? Now let's go into the controller, into the auth controller, and right here above login, we can go ahead and actually let's just copy the whole shebang, paste it here, and let's just call it logout. Okay, we will still accept a parameter, and this is going to be a logout ID. And here, let's not return anything. So we'll get to logout ID in a second, but the first thing that I want to do is I just want to actually make this a task, because what we're going to do is we're going to be using the sign-in manager to sign out, right? So we're just going to go ahead, await on the sign-in manager, and just sign out async, right? So once this line executes, the cookies are going to be cleared, and we're essentially going to be signed out from the identity server. And this is going to be triggered after we sign out from the client. So the process will be we sign out on the client, we go to identity server to sign out here, and then we want to end up back at our client. Okay, and the way we recognize what client we signed out, we're trying to sign out from, is through the logout ID. And the way we find out what it is, if we go into the identity server documentation and we drop down to the references, these are all objects that identity server implements. So do have a read through this section just to familiarize yourself with what identity server provides to you in terms of infrastructure. And what we want to do is grab the interaction service, right? So this interface. And the particular part we're interested in is the get logout context async, which accepts the logout ID parameter, right? Which is part of the OIDC spec, and the OpenID Connect middleware and OIDC client will provide this parameter when we log out. So let's go ahead and add this through dependency injection, and let's just call this interaction service. I don't want to call it let's go ahead and make a global field. So now what we can do is, what this bit returns is a logout request. So let's go ahead and grab a logout request from the interaction service, and we will get logout context async. And let's await on this. And we will need to pass our logout ID in here. And what this will do is just basically same as we have an HTTP context, which is responsible for your HTTP request that you make. The logout context is responsible for the context of the process of logging out, right? It's the bubble in which it happens, right? So let's go ahead and do some checks like logout request, and we will check the post logout redirect URI. Let's see if its string is null or empty, right? So if it's null or empty, let's just make sure that we are safe and return redirect to action, something like index home. We don't have a index homepage on our identity server, but you want to basically put some kind of safeguard like that here. Otherwise, if we have it, we can just go ahead and redirect to this URL here. Okay, so this is pretty much it. Let's put a breakpoint here so we can observe the things that happen. Now the next thing that we want to do is actually register a logout callback. Our identity server needs a configuration of basically saying, right, what are the basically logout callbacks? Same as we have sign-in callbacks to basically redirect us back to the client so we can get our authorization code or register the tokens for the JavaScript client. The same way we want to specify valid post logout redirect URIs, right? And we do that in the configuration section. So in here, let's go ahead and for our MVC client, let's add a post logout redirect URIs. And here I will just say home/index. Okay, I will copy this line and I will just do exactly the same for my JavaScript client, since we pretty much have both of the pages on both clients, right? So let's go ahead and make sure we change the port. But remember that we're using an entity framework and databases now, so if we run the application, it's not going to get updated, right? So what I want to do is I want to manually put these addresses into the database. So let's go ahead and open SQL Server Object Explorer, and let's go into the client post logout redirect URIs table, and let's view data. And at this point, it should be empty. And let me actually pin this guy right here. Let's also grab the client so we know which IDs we're dealing with. So MVC client is ID 1 and JavaScript client is ID 3. Okay. So for the configuration for our JavaScript client, let's go ahead, grab this, put this here, and client ID is 3. For our MVC client, we want to put client ID 2. This should be pretty much it. One thing that I want to do for our MVC client, I copied the wrong URL actually, but we will see what happens because of that. So what we want to do is we want to register this post logout redirect URI with our OIDC middleware, because, and this is just for the MVC client for now. The JavaScript client will get to it once we get to it. And the reason for this is because on the MVC client, if you remember, there is the back channel. All right. So this is when we actually want to tell our OIDC middleware where to redirect back as well, right? So let's go into the startup here, and here we want to grab the config first and grab the sign out callback path, and let's just put /home/index here. Now at this point, we will need to actually implement the logout functionality on our MVC client. So let's go ahead into the home controller here, and somewhere below secret, let's go ahead and just say public action result logout as well, and let's return sign out. And sign out is a method on the base controller, so we go in here, this is in the base controller, right? So here we want to provide 2 parameters, and these 2 parameters are going to be associated with 2 of our schemas, right? So we want to get rid of the cookie and the OIDC session. So this is literally what we're passing, cookie and OIDC. And when we sign out from the OIDC session, that's when through the back channel, it's going to sign out from Identity Server as well. Okay. So at this point, I have my API 1 Identity Server JavaScript client and MVC client set to startup. So let's go ahead and start them up. Okay, so here I have the MVC client. Let's go ahead into home/secret. It will redirect us to the Identity Server. We will sign in. So here we are on the secret page, right? And what will happen is I will go to /logout, and I brought the console up with preserve logs just so we can observe the redirect if any happen. And they shouldn't, because the logout will happen in the back channel, right? So this is just so you can get a visual of it. Now I'm entering the logout page, and here I should have logout ID as null. And usually if you have logout ID null, that's because the redirect page that you have set here is incorrect. This is basically what I've done as well. So what should happen is the OIDC middleware will then try to redirect you to the Identity Server homepage, right? Because that's the result that got returned. You can't actually see us being redirected to the Identity Server sign out page, right? So let's go ahead and fix this. I'm just gonna grab the /home/index bits, and I'm gonna replace the sign in OIDC here. Okay, so now this should work as expected. So let's go ahead and open this up. I'm going to click backwards to go to the secret page, and here I'm going to sign in again. Okay, so let me clear the console here, and let's go ahead and log out again. Okay, now we have the logout ID. Since the configured sign out path is the same as the sign out path that's configured on our identity server, they match. So now it basically knows which client is trying to sign out. So now it will actually give us a proper redirect URI. And if we return, here we are navigating just back to the homepage of the MVC client, right? So that's the story of the MVC client. Let's go ahead and grab our JavaScript client. And if we sign in here, Bob password, right? So how we signed out from the MVC client has also signed out from the identity server. This is why we have to sign in again. Now that we're here signed in, let's go ahead and implement the logout button and stuff like that. I will keep the, actually I won't keep it. Let's close that. Auth controller, let's keep the auth controller. Startup, I'll close that. So we want to go into JavaScript wherever we had our main JS. And let's go ahead and just create a function, sign out, right? And no surprise, we will be using the user manager. And again, I might misspell it as I do things all the time. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to open up the browser here, the console, and I'm going to grab the user manager object here, and I'm going to look for a sign out redirect function, right? So let's go ahead, grab this. I'll just paste this here, and that should be it. Let's put a semicolon here, and now the same way that we have configured the OIDC middleware, we have to configure our config here as well. And again, this configuration will depend on your environment. So if you're using Vue.js, you will have the .env file, and you will do something like process.environment or stuff like that to basically see which URLs to use, right? So again, for what options for the config we want, let's go ahead and just go to the OIDC client, and we will go into the wiki page. And this is pretty much how you want to find these options and just the general development cycle. And again, we'll find the option that looks similar, post logout redirect URI. That's exactly what we're looking for. So let's go ahead and specify this option here. And it will look pretty much exactly the same as this one, except it will have index instead. Okay, so one thing that will happen, or actually, wait, let's go ahead and put a button first, and let's point it to our sign out. Let's go into views, home, index, and here let's copy this div. Let's call this sign out function that we're gonna call. Okay, so one point to drive home is that we have signed in with the previous configuration. So I would not be surprised if this fails right now. So refreshing it, and it's recompiling the Razor. Okay, so here we are. Let's go ahead and try to sign out. Okay, so here we are in our auth controller again. We have the logout ID, so should be no problem. Ooh, I guess it did have a problem. Let's start this again. Okay, so here we are on our home client again. Let's go ahead and sign in first. Bob, password, sign in. Okay, so here we are. I'll clear the console and let's sign out. Logout ID, we still got it. Let's go ahead and paste this, and here we are. So let's try to call the API, and we should get the error. And now the error, basically, if we're not signed in, we're going to get a login required instead of it trying to refresh the token, right? So if we try to look in our local storage, it's going to be cleared. So just again, to see that visibility, if we look in the local storage here for 345 port, here it is, 345. If we sign out now, again for the 345 part, local storage is now clear, right? So that's pretty much it For the sign out functionality, highlights to take away is the post redirect URIs in the configuration. Don't miss them out. You need to specify them on both the identity server part and the client that you're using. All right, and the library or the middleware will take care of the redirects for you. And I do highly recommend check out this interaction services. It has quite a bit of few other stuff. So if you're going to be working with multiple clients, you will be using it throughout your login and register functions as well, right? But that's enough of that. Let's go ahead and dive into certificates. Now, for the certificate part, it's important to understand that a proper solution requires security experts, etc. So let's say if you're at Google and you're trying to provide authentication with two-factor auth, etc., you will need security experts and you will need to be a security expert to implement this. But if you have a small project and the likelihood of you getting hacked will be small, same as all security isn't perfect. It's just very, very hard to guess numbers, right? It's just reducing the likelihood of a bad situation happening, right? So there are many things you can do the proper way, generating your own certificate authority, putting on 3 USB sticks, locking them in a safe, all that. We're not going to be discussing that. We're just going to take a look at how to generate a sample certificate and import it into your identity server. Identity server also provide a key management solution. You can look it up in their documentation, but if you're going to go that route, I assume you're already a little bit more serious into security of your identity server. Having this one will do just fine, right? So I'm not going to pretend that, again, I am a security expert or I know anything about PowerShell. I know a few things, but not enough to consider myself anywhere near good. But nevertheless, let's go ahead and check out this blog post. I will leave it in the description. We're just going to look at some commands he provides here. Who's this? Kirk Evans. And really helpful post. Generally, all you need is PowerShell. You can use make cert. You can use OpenSSL. I'm pretty sure you can even use SSH keygen because that generates you an RSS key. RSA key. I'm pretty sure you can take the private and public key out of the files and somehow put it in there. But the general idea is we want to generate a certificate, and this is what this first command is going to do. But before we go to generate the certificates, let's go into Visual Studio and let's take a look at what we actually need to supply, right? So in our identity server, let's go into Startup, and where we have the add developer signing credentials, let's go ahead, comment this out, and let's add signing credential, right? Put a semicolon in the end there, F12 to navigate to it, and let's take a look at what it accepts, right? So going back to what Mr. Evans is explaining here is basically this function will generate a .NET X509 certificate 2 class, and this is essentially the route that we want to go here, okay? So we're going to be generating this class. So let's go ahead and put a little scaffolding here for the certificate equals new this class. If you don't have the namespace for it, go ahead and import it. But for the constructor, we will essentially need to provide two things, a file name and a password. There are obviously other routes, but this is the one that we're going to be taking here. And I apologize in advance. This is going to be a bit of a just follow what I do here because that's exactly what I did. Since I don't work with certificates daily, I just wanted to get the thing set up and running close to properly, right? So let's go ahead and copy this command. And what we want to do is in here, in identity server, because that's essentially where I want to output my certificate. I want to open the command line and I want to open PowerShell. And let's go ahead and just paste the command here. And it will just do that. Oh my god. I'll just press up to take a look at the command again. And let me remove this. Okay. So I got the command into the PowerShell. Clap for me. Right, so breaking it down a little bit, we have the new self-signed certificate command, subject, and here is the command name, I think, CN, or certificate name. Let's go ahead and type in whatever you want, but I will type in identity server example here. Get certificate store location. This is where we want to store our location. This may come in handy, but the rest of it you pretty much don't want touched. Just set your common name so you can identify your certificate, right? And not sure what that part on the end was, but let's go ahead, enter. Okay, and this should create our certificate. Now, coming back to what Kirk says here, one of the commands that he also shows is this get child item /path and certificate. This is current user my. This is essentially where we create our certificate, right? So this is just a good way to take a look at what kind of certificates you have. Here's these two dumb certificates that I have created automatically by running the command when I paste it. So here he also shows you the removing certificate. So I'm just going to go ahead, paste this command here. I will copy the thumbprint and put it inside the brackets here, enter, and I will do the same for this since I don't want these certificates interfering here. And enter here. And now if I rerun the command to list my certificates, there we go. There's another one there, but I will leave it for now. The most important thing is that I have my identity server example certificate here, and that's what I'm basically after, right? And another thing is that this command has created the certificate and has returned the certificate into this variable here. So if I go ahead and type in cert, this is going to bring out my certificate. Now, one thing, let's say I close my PowerShell and it's like, where's my certificate, right? How do I put it back into my variable? Well, again, this get child item, you can use this command to get it back in there again. So let's open another PowerShell window. So we type in cert and we have an empty variable. And if I go ahead and grab the command to get child items from the same path, let's go ahead, paste it in here, enter. And now, since we can take a look at either the thumbprint or if you remember the common name, we can go ahead, take the whole command, and if I can copy, please. I'll just press up to retrieve. Looks like I'm copying an extra space or something like that. But yeah, again, with this last bit, I don't know 100% what it does. I'm not a PowerShell guy, but I guess we just basically want to find a certificate with the name that we are going to provide. So for this, I'm going to grab the name here, paste it here, and there you go. I again have my certificate in this variable. Alright, so we have the certificate. Let's go ahead and export it to a PFX file. So this is essentially how you do it, right? So we want to export the private key, and these are the commands that we want to run. So the first one is get credentials. We're essentially just going to input some credentials. So let's just say test and password. I'm using password. You can use what you want. Again, you want to remember this password and store it somewhere in a secret vault, and only input your certificate, your live certificate and parameters from the vault once you're deploying, or keep it on the server securely, right? You don't want other people touching your certificate. You don't want to keep it publicly. Don't commit it to your repository. Don't make it public is the key takeaway here, right? Right, so we have our credentials, and if we output the variable credentials, there we have it. And again, output the variable cert, we have our certificate. Now the next command is pretty much let's export the certificate. I'm going to paste this here, breaking down this command, export PFX certificate, certificate, password, we grab the password variable here and file path. Let's go ahead and fix this up a bit since we are already in the directory where I want to put it. Let me expand this a little bit. I essentially just want to do // to put it in the same directory, and I will do is for identity server cert. And let me just press enter. And here we go. In this directory, we have created identity server certificate. So now in my project, I should have this certificate. What I want to do now is I want to pop it into this class. And again, we want the file name, and file name should really be named file path. And password is the password that we have input into the credentials step. Right, so let's grab the file. So the way we grab the file, we grab path, combine, and the next thing that we want to do is we want to grab a hold of our root environment path. So we want to point to the certificate, right? And depending on where your project is, after building, it's going to be in a separate directory. So we want a iWeb hosting environment injected in our startup, or we can inject it straight into this function here. And we can go ahead and grab this environment variable, and we want the content root path. There is also a web root path, and that is the path to your www root folder, but we want the content root path, and then we just want to provide the name of our certificate. Okay, so now that we have the file path, let's supply it to the constructor here, and the password, I have chosen it to be password for simplicity purposes. And now that I have my certificate, I can just pass it here. Now again, to re-emphasize this, the certificate and the password, it's preferably that you don't even know the password. Generate the password, store it somewhere securely, and make it be injectable. Make it so it's injected automatically. That's probably a tutorial for another day. Right, so we're passing a certificate here. Let's go ahead and launch this and make sure that everything still works. I'm going to put a breakpoint here. Okay, so we hit the breakpoint. Usually if the loading of the certificate fails, you will get an error right here. I haven't got an error, so the loading has gone successfully. And if I look at the CN, it will be identity server example, just what I've named it. Let's go ahead and press F5 to pass through this. Now I'm going to go to home/secret, sign in. Okay, and now this is the breakpoint inside the home controller, and I just want to make sure, I want to take a look at the results and make sure that the validation of the access token is happening and that I can still access my secured resources. And I can see the secret message there coming from API 1, and that pretty much indicates that I'm accessing a secured endpoint on my client and a secured endpoint on my API, right? So everything is working fine. This will be it for this episode. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments section. Hopefully, I'll see you around in my other episodes.